Welcome to this revision video on Eysenck's theory of criminal personality. In terms of where this fits into your course, it comes in the criminal psychology unit, and it's one of the key theories that you need to know alongside social learning theory. While we go through this video, have a piece of paper next to you, take some notes, and this will help you with the rest of your revision. And then there is a Google quiz form thing just to help you make sure that you've picked up the key points of the video. We're going to look at the main points of the theory and then a few criticisms to finish. So first off, the key theory. We need to remember that this whole theory is based on personality. So personality traits that may cause offending behaviour and where they come from. Now this is a really complicated theory. I recognise that, and I think you need to recognise it too. This is one of the trickier bits of the GCSE psychology that we've done so far. So I've split it into three kind of levels of what you need to know for each of the personality traits, from the description to how it links to crime to the biological cause. Absolutely everyone should be able to tell me what each of these personality traits means and hopefully how that can lead to criminal behaviour. The extension material that everyone should try to get to grips with, but not worry too much about if they don't understand everything behind it, is the biological cause. So when we get to the bottom of the table, try and think about those words, try and remember those phrases, but if you don't fully understand it, don't panic too much, because this is the very hardest stuff that we've done so far. Okay, so let's start thinking about these personality traits. We've got three of them, and these are the three traits that Eysenck reckoned led to criminal personality and therefore offending behaviour, people committing crimes. Now the first one is extroversion. So extroversion is a personality trait where people are outgoing, sociable, confident. They seek that interaction and that stimulation, and they do that through their social circles and through their choice of activities. So think about someone like Bruno Tonioli from Strictly Come Dancing. Loves being centre of attention, always wants to be at a party, doesn't want to sit in the corner and read a book. That is someone who is a perfect definition of an extrovert. Okay, now, this is fine until people start seeking that stimulation from criminal behaviour. So we talked about, when we were looking at this in class, we talked about the buzz that you might get from being at a party or doing an extreme sport. That's fine when it sticks to being at a party and doing an extreme sport, but sometimes extroverts might look to criminal behaviour for these thrills, whether that's joyriding or getting away with burglary or fraud that they have to plan really carefully in order to get away with it. That kind of thrill of potentially being caught, or the thrill of whatever it is that you're doing, could lead extroverts to crime. Now this is where it gets tricky and yet really interesting. So this thrill seeking happens because the reticular activation system restricts the information from being sent to the cerebral cortex, leaving it hungry for stimulation. So the reticular activation system kind of acts like a barrier to activity. And it is a barrier to it going towards the cerebral cortex, which is a part of the brain. Therefore, because extroverts aren't getting as much information, it means that they want more and they find it through these thrills. Okay, so it's they're hungry for that activation, for that stimulation. Otherwise, they get bored easily, because smaller things like sitting by a fire and reading a book or having a conversation with a couple of people doesn't activate that part of the brain, and so they need more in order to get that activation. Along with this, we also find that extroverts have a stronger dopamine reward system. So your dopamine reward system is the chemical in your brain that fires when you feel pleasure. So that might be from when you eat chocolate, or it might be from when you do exercise. It might be when you get a reward. And extroverts have a stronger dopamine reward system, which means they respond positively to rewards, whether that's money, sex, or status. So they might commit crimes in order to get that money or status. And this can explain why they turn to crime as well. Okay, so that's our extroversion. That's the first of the 3 personality traits that are linked to criminal behaviour. Now we're going to look at neuroticism, which is a different personality trait. So we've got extroversion, which is the opposite of introversion, and now we've got neuroticism, which is on a different scale. Now, neurotics are emotionally unstable people. So they might often feel anxious, guilty, worried, and their emotions can change really quickly. This can lead them to get stuck in patterns of behaviour to relieve that anxiety. It can also mean that when they're in an emotionally charged situation, they might respond quickly without thinking it through because their emotions have changed quickly. So this can lead to crime for both of these behaviours. So it might be that their crimes are helping them to relieve anxiety, or it might be that they're reacting to emotionally charged situations. Now, the reason that people find themselves with this personality trait is that the autonomic nervous system is unable to control activity in the brain's limbic system, which leads to high emotions. So your limbic system is the part of your brain that gives you all of your emotional responses. And if the autonomic nervous system, which is part of your nervous system, can't control that activity, then this is when you get really extreme emotions, and people find that they kind of can't turn that off. Okay, so that's the biology behind it. And finally, we get to psychoticism. This was a personality trait that was added a little bit later than extroversion and neuroticism, but is now thought to be the most strongly correlated with criminal behaviour. And you can see why straight away as we look at the definition of psychoticism and the description of a psychotic person. And this is that they are impulsive, aggressive, and selfish. Now, straight away, that link to crime is really clear to see because the characteristics of psychotic people are directly related to criminal behaviour. Because crimes might be committed impulsively, they could be violent crimes that come from aggression, they could be acquisitive crimes that come from a level of selfishness where you're taking from someone else. Now, the biological cause for this one again comes back to dopamine, but in a slightly different way. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. Now, when we've looked at synapses in another part of the course, you'll remember that a neurotransmitter takes the message from one neuron to another by drifting or kind of moving across the synaptic cleft. Okay, so as it diffuses across, as it drifts across, as it moves across, it's taking information and making the second neuron, the postsynaptic neuron, fire. Now, if there's too much dopamine, that can lead to too many of these impulses firing after the synapse. And this can lead to really impulsive behaviour because you're not stopping any of those impulses. So that explains why people are psychotic and therefore why they might commit impulsive crimes. So there we've got 3 different personality traits: extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism. As I said, everyone should be able to tell me what these mean, and most of you should hopefully at least try to tell me how they link to crime. And you've got some keywords on the screen at the moment, so if nothing else, learn those keywords. And then likewise, with the biological cause, try and learn some of these phrases so that you can explain why people might find themselves extrovert or neurotic and how that is based in biological factors. Okay, so we are talking about personality, but we're talking about how it comes from your biology. The last thing to note about this theory is that Eysenck argued that people who are high on these scales are more likely to commit crimes, and that this is because they are more resistant to socialization in which society teaches them right and wrong. So they're resistant to the kind of teaching, learning, and conditioning in which we teach children to follow rules and to follow laws. This doesn't mean they are doomed to commit a crime, but that teachers and parents will need to work harder to steer them away from criminal activity. We'll come back to this when we look at the criticisms, but for now it's just important that you look at this and think, well, it's not directly that extroversion leads to crime, but it's that extroversion leads to people not being able to learn right and wrong as easily because they are seeking those thrills. Or psychotics might find it difficult to be socialized because of their impulsive behavior. Okay, finally, we need to think about some of the criticisms of this theory. So the first one is that Eysenck's theory is accused of ignoring individual differences. So rather than emphasizing the uniqueness of people, he tried to place them in broad categories. And critics would argue that it's wrong to lump them together and assume they have similar reasons for turning to crime when criminals have a lot of different reasons for committing crimes, and they can lead to very different crimes too. So it is oversimplifying it to just put them in these broad categories of psychotics, extroverts, and neurotics. Second one, with such a range of crimes, it seems unlikely that criminals share a personality. So this is linked to the first, but now we're looking at the range of crimes that people commit. So even if we accept that these broad personality types exist, it's hard to accept that a person who maybe robs someone in the street because they suddenly see that they have a handbag is the same kind of person as someone who carefully plans to defraud a whole company. Actually, in his later work, Eysenck himself suggested that violent people might be more stable than neurotic, particularly those who plan their violence rather than those who react impulsively to a situation, like a bar fight, for example. And finally, Eysenck's theory can still be seen as deterministic. Despite the fact that he said that people could be socialised, it just takes a little bit more work, critics still argue that it suggests that people are born with their personality type and therefore their chance of becoming criminal is mainly driven by their biology. This is a problem because it means that we don't give people responsibility for their actions, and therefore it's a problem for the justice system too, because it's very difficult to punish people if we're saying they had no free will or they had no choice over the situation. Hopefully that has been a helpful revision video for you. If you go back to the Google quiz now, you can give it a go and see how much you remember. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in school.